Today is day 39 from A Gracious Face Fall, and the title is The Joy of Shared Reading. I was friends with an 88-year-old man named Wayne, father-in-law to my running partner. I visited him at his nursing home until he died in the fall of 2013. When I first met Wayne, I was reading the novel For the Arrow, A Long Way from Chicago by Richard Peck. It dawned on me that the story took place in Wayne's hometown, Decatur, Illinois. It is set during the Great Depression, the period of Wayne's early childhood. When I visited him one day, I told him about the book. He asked me to read it to him. We read chapter 1, and he could not stop laughing. He loved it so much. He also would comment, "Are you sure this is for children?" With good reason. Richard Peck, the author, plays fast and loose with the reader's sense of right and wrong that always ends up right side up. I haven't read aloud to anyone in years. I enjoyed reading to Wayne so much, I nearly cried at the end of each chapter. To share a book with an engaged audience is a life-giving, rich experience. Wayne and I exclaimed over the writing, laughed at the jokes, discussed historical details, and compared them to Wayne's memories. We talked about the shifts in values across generations. Wayne died 6 months after I began reading to him. I miss him. What an experience. If your young ones are gone, find someone to read to. It is nourishing for all involved, and I swear, children's novels are the best. Quote of the day. Yes, reading aloud is valuable to the listener and to the reader. My elderly in-laws read aloud to each other all the time, mostly newspapers and magazines, and clearly they are both having a great experience. Thank you, Julie, for the idea that when our time reading aloud to our kids ends, we can find other ways to do so. Julie Kirkwood. Sustaining thought. Share a story, make a friend. Share a laugh or a tear and create a bond. You're never too young or too old to enjoy a good read with anyone who will listen. One of the favorite stories for me that I read in recent months was about a practice going on in barber shops in many of the African American neighborhoods in America. There is a tradition that was started, and I wish I could remember who. I heard this story on NPR, National Public Radio, where the barber would refund or pay $2 of the haircut fee back to the child if that child would read a book from his little library of books for children while he was getting his haircut. So in would come a little boy, the barber would say, pick a book, and then the boy would pick up the book and read it aloud to the barber while the barber cut his hair. And when it was over, he'd even give him a refund. He'd give him $2. There is something really powerful about reading aloud. And it's not just about making sure your kids get a good education. It's also a way of valuing the reading experience, whether you're reading to your children or you're asking them to conversely read to you or read to the pet dog or read to the toddler who needs a read. In fact, yesterday, Johanna had one of her best friends from her homeschooling years over, and this lovely friend of Johanna's is a young mother with a 3-year-old child. I mean, it's staggering. I've known this young woman since she was 12, so it was really, really fun to see her all grown up, see her with her little boy. And this little boy came right in, and he looked around my house, and then he walked into my family room, so I followed him in. And I climbed up on the couch and I said, Julian, you want to sit next to me? And he said, yes. And then he just climbed up on the couch next to me and immediately he assumed the pose. Like, you know that pose where they know you're about to read to them? And so I picked up a book and he did this big little sigh and he leaned into my body. And the next thing you know, we're talking about the pictures in the book. And I thought, that's a mother who's read aloud to a child. Because he knew exactly what to do, and he doesn't know me from anyone. The last time I saw him, he was a newborn. So here is this sweet little boy in a house he doesn't know with a woman he's never met in his experience, And he just sees, oh, you climb up on a couch, lean your head into a person, and let them read to you. So adorable. I want grandkids. So do you see what I'm saying? Reading aloud creates this community experience, but it also seasons the mind and creates an appetite for good language, for story, for shared community. One of the beautiful things that happened when I was reading to Wayne back in the nursing home is that his hearing was failing, and he even had a hard time seeing. He could talk all right, it was a little bit halting and stilted, and so sometimes the reading was labored, especially in the early months. He just couldn't quite always follow everything I was saying. But what I discovered is this book by Richard Peck was literally a series of stories, like Homer Price, just a collection of stories. It wasn't an overarching story of a novel where you had to remember the plot from last week to even understand what was going on this week. And I sort of stumbled on that accidentally. So I recommend that to you because I could engage each week newly, not worrying about whether he retained the characters of the storyline from the previous week. And he was so delighted by the mischievousness of the main character. That's the part that I really took away. Here it is, this book written ostensibly for children. And in a weird way, this elderly gentleman actually got more out of it than the average child because he caught the irony. And he was delighted by the slippery, manipulation of the grandmother, all in service of her love and values for this family and this community. And it was momentarily shocking at times. And he got that on a level that even children wouldn't get it. So when you're thinking about reading with somebody besides your kids, or you're reading with an older person, or someone whose attention span can't handle a full novel, think about short stories or reading a book that is what looks like a chapter book, but is really a collection of stories, and that might help too. The other thing that I want to say about reading aloud is that it teaches your children how to have emotional reactions to content that they don't yet understand. When you read to your children, you are modeling to them the kind of engagement that a book provokes in you. I don't know if you even realize how much they're watching. I remember Johanna explained to me that I would be reading, Charlotte's Web, some book, and all of a sudden I'd get choked up and tears would come to my eyes, and she would think to herself, oh, something is happening right now, and I'm supposed to be sad, or I'm supposed to be touched, or why is Mom crying? Because I was having one of those domino experiences where the writing I'm reading is knocking into a previous memory, which is knocking into a previous experience, which is knocking into a greater understanding of how the world works. So I'm watching the dominoes fall, and it's producing this emotion in me. But my kids are at the first domino. And so I'm actually modeling to them, well, what is just? What is not just? What deserves a laugh? When is laughter not appropriate? Have you ever been reading where your kids laugh at something and you know that that's not really the right reaction? Like maybe you're reading about a bullying moment, some kid playing a trick on some other kid. Maybe it's a kid making fun of some child who has a disability, like you see in the book Wonder. And then you have a child who starts laughing because the trick is funny. But of course the trick isn't funny because of the effect it's having on the main character. Well, while you're reading aloud, and if you see that experience erupt in your child, you're present to it. And it's not that you're going to correct it, because you can't tell someone not to have a reaction. But what you can notice instantly is that in your family, maybe the whole discussion of bullying and tearing down people who are different hasn't really been explored. And here's your opportunity while you're reading aloud to have the reaction that you know is a bigger picture reaction, a lived experience reaction, where you can sort of, just in your own heart, just sort of witness to the sadness or the tragedy, not the humor. It's also a way for you to explore some of the values you have without pounding them over your kids' heads in lectures. If you pick the right quality of read-alouds, you will find that you have many opportunities to talk about things like loyalty and community and putting your needs aside for the needs of those that don't have what you have. Or conversely, to be grateful for those who've made a way for you when you were the one who was ostracized or not welcomed in. It gives you a picture of history. You know, you get to explore the interior of a lived experience in another moment of time or in a different part of the country or a different part of the world. And sometimes that creates this sense of belonging to the story of humanity that transcends this present moment. And it can sort of restore you to your equilibrium, especially if you are in a moment of disorientation. I talk a lot as well when I talk about reading aloud, that it's important to read across genres. You don't only want to read historical fiction, although historical fiction is the warp and woof of homeschooling families. I mean, most people read historical fiction. But what I recommend is that you also read nonfiction. Go and find a good children's nonfiction book and pick a topic. You know, it could be outer space. You might pick backyard birding. You might pick a topic like the history of origami. And each day or every other day, read a few pages. Explore what it sounds like to read about and write about a topic that is not a story. You will unwittingly lay a foundation for your students' ability to write in the academic forms when they start to get an ear for what nonfiction writing sounds like. Isn't that interesting? Is that something you've thought about? It's a very, very important part of growing as a reader and a writer. Another piece of reading that I always recommend is poetry. And of course, you can pair it with tea time and even just do it once a week. But include tongue twisters, rhyme, nursery rhymes, all of those wonderful poetic forms, haiku, limericks, quatrains, because children love the music of language and they will latch on to imagery and literary language, figurative language, literary devices more easily when they find them in poetry because they just stand out. They pop up like daisies. You can just see them. Another source that we used in our read aloud times was Aesop's Fables. I had a great fables book, and we would read one a day, and then we would talk for a few minutes about it. Sometimes we thought that the Aesop's Fables were really stupid. Have you ever had that experience where you're reading something and you're like, I'm reading the Aesop's Fable. This is a very important part of my academic curriculum for my children. And then you read the fable and you're like, that is the dumbest thing. When you have that reaction, can you please say it out loud so that your kids can have the opportunity to tell you something was stupid? So that when they find something that's the dumbest thing, they feel free to tell you about it. Sometimes you'll read a book and it's awful. Awful. You get 6 or 8 chapters in and everyone can't remember who the characters are. And they keep reading with you and you're like, what happened yesterday? And it's just a labor. Nobody cares. You cannot drag them up this hill of reading this book, and yet everybody in your life told you it was the best read aloud. There are too many books in the world to finish a book no one is enjoying. Do you hear me? There is nobody grading you on how many books you complete in reading aloud. The only grade you're getting is whether or not your children enjoy hearing a book read aloud. So if they're not enjoying it, you're getting an F, okay? And if you're getting an F, would you please drop the class before we make you pay for it? Just put the book away and go find a better book, all right? And some families are going to have a penchant for fantasy, and other families are going to be like, we do not do fantasy. Some families are going to love old-timey historical fiction from some other Charlotte Mason-y era, and others are going to be like, dang, I got to read what's current because I can't go there. And all of it will accomplish the same goal, because literally all reading benefits you, whether it is reading billboards or blogs or books or poetry. Just make sure you do a cross-section. Go out there and look for genres. And you might read some online stuff with your kids. I don't know why you wouldn't, to be honest. If you have a child who's a big gamer and the best place to read about Minecraft is online, wouldn't your child be shocked if in the morning read aloud routine, you pulled out your phone or your iPad and you pulled up a link to an article on Minecraft and you said, okay, we've read our chapter from our historical fiction. I've read you an Aesop's fable. We read a little bit about the hummingbird. And oh, I thought we would read this article about how to build a blah, blah, blah in Minecraft. And you read it aloud. How valued would your child feel? How much would that internet moment mean to your family that you considered it worthy of the curriculum time of your homeschool? See what I mean? And how important is it for children to know that reading online is not an inferior form of reading? It's actually the zeitgeist of reading. You know, we have a joke in our family that whenever we're having a conversation and somebody doesn't know something, we're like, who's going to Google it? You know, who's got an iPhone? In fact, we kind of have a joke. We'll say things like, if only someone had an iPhone, right? Because why are we arguing? We can go find out the data right then, and we can read about it and be an instant expert, or at least an instant silly expert, not somebody who really knows, but somebody who has some information now that we can deal with that's real. So showing your kids all the books, all the sources. You could read from a magazine. You could go read from some other source I'm not even thinking of, an almanac, a field guide. Include, you know, an art history book, a book that's only pictures and no words, a graphic novel. These are all the different genres of writing. You could read from a play. One of the things I remember with our kids, we used Leon Garfield's Shakespeare stories to introduce them to Shakespeare. And then we would watch the little, they used to have these 30-minute videos where claymation characters would act out the Shakespeare play that Leon Garfield had written about. Just a nice little 30-minute version. And then we would watch the actual movie, like, you know, Mel Gibson's Hamlet, or Emma Thompson's Much Ado About Nothing, nudity warning in all of them, so just know that. But we would watch those movies. And then we would get out my mother's massive volume of the complete works of Shakespeare that she gave to me. And we might read a soliloquy or the famous scene from Romeo and Juliet from the book. Now that we've already known the story, seen a little video, watched a major movie, now we would go to the script and look at what the play was and see how Shakespeare represented the lines that we now understand, which sounds counterintuitive. When you're in high school, they don't do it that way. They start with the play. They have a community room of kids who don't care, reading language they don't understand before they ever see the play. It is no wonder kids are snoozing by the time they ever get around to actually watching a movie. You can go the other way around. And by doing that, you give your kids the opportunity to even work backwards, to see sort of the cold lifelessness of a script, and then just how powerfully rendered it is by actors and directors and producers. So when you're reading aloud, let's recap. Think about the fact that you represent a reader, somebody who is going to have an adult encounter with text. And you're going to bring your adult, rich experience in life with you into the reading moment. And that is going to be a witness to your children of what it looks like to respond to literature. Just your laughter, your tears, your pause, the way your voice sort of hesitates when you get to a part that you know is going to move you. You are having this tutorial in what values look like funneled through a human being. Not just put on a chalkboard and articulated as some kind of statement of family values, but you're going to live them and breathe them. And then you can use any genre in your read aloud time. It can be poetry, nursery rhymes, scripts, Aesop's fables, historical fiction, nonfiction, a field guide, an art book, any kind of online article that relates to something you're studying. That's what your newspapers that are dying, may as well get one before they're totally gone. See what they look like. Show your kids how awkward it is to manage this big piece of newspaper, which I never liked because I'm so small. I loved it when the news went online because now I could read it really easily. And here's all these, big people in my life with the newspaper. Oh, I couldn't even do it. Picture books are incredible. Picture books help you to sort of narrow the focus of a subject area and then pair it with lively illustrations. And I used to think, I've heard a lot of adults say this, but I used to think about the fact that if I really wanted to boil down the information that I needed, I could start in the children's picture book section before I would go into the adult section and get some treatise on, whatever, ancient Rome. Go to children's picture books if you want to know about ancient Rome long before you pull out the chapter books, because you'll get some visuals and there will be an author who has distilled the principal ideas into a smaller format. And that helps. It's kind of like Wikipedia, but prettier. And then finally, if you have the opportunity to read aloud to a family member who is older, I highly recommend it. Take your children with you. Maybe you can do a read aloud time or a poetry tea time at the local nursing home with relatives or people you adopt to be your relatives. Get some cross-generational stuff going on here. Share the wealth. It's incredible how much someone who feels alone is given a sense of companionship through books. And if their eyesight is failing and they can't really do it for themselves, it is beyond generous to give that gift from you, a human being, to another human being, not just audiobook, but for you to be present, to share that reading aloud experience. And just a full circle all the way back. Reading aloud to children is the gateway to a fabulous vocabulary for kids. So no matter who you are or how well you read, even if you are not a great reader, this is your chance to grow together and build your own vocabulary. I trust you. Work on it together, even if you can only read a little bit at a time, even if English is your second language, even if the tradition of reading aloud was not a part of your family or your childhood experience. Maybe just start with a paragraph or a poem a day, or an Aesop's fable. Pick something short and do it over breakfast. You don't have to dive in and do 6 books to Tuesday. You can just start with something short and meaningful to you. Maybe a quote you read online. Maybe the refrigerator magnet that you love and bought because the saying on it was so important to you. Maybe start there and do it casually. Say things like, I was reading XYZ and I wanted to share it with you. And then read it. Even if all it is one phrase, just share it with an interested audience. And if you need truly, consistently interested audiences, they are all about 3 feet tall and under 3 years old, or they're over 80. Those 2 groups, they will always be receptive audiences. You can start there if reading aloud is nerve-wracking to you. How about that? Okay, everyone, I'm going to hop off and let you get on with your day. I hope that some of you will share in the comments about your read aloud experiences, favorite ones, ways that reading aloud was meaningful to you. I will just end on this. My mother, Karen O'Connor, who is a published author, she's written 85 books and has been in the world of published writing for my entire life. She read to me the Laura Ingalls Wilder books, the Little House on the Prairie books, aloud. The whole series. I was a school kid. I wasn't homeschooled. But she read those aloud to me, and I can still remember laying in my bed with her as she read those books aloud to me, and it caused me to have a lifelong love affair with Laura Ingalls Wilder. And when my kids were right in the middle years and we were moving across country from California to Ohio, the only thing I wanted to do to ensure that we had the experience was to drive to De Smet and see Laura Ingalls Wilder's home. And we did. And that seed was planted when I was a child and was not realized till I was 38. So you never know what you're putting in your children. I still remember thinking, oh, I want to write a book about my life when I grow up, but I'm having such a boring life compared to Laura. I didn't think the white suburbs of LA were actually going to be interesting for a whole book series. It wasn't exactly frontier life. So sometimes that happens too. And I sometimes wonder how much my sort of craving and thirst for adventure was created through reading about Laura's childhood on the frontier of the United States of America. Isn't that something? Isn't that something? You never know. You don't know what you're doing when you're reading aloud to your kids, except that you're doing the one right thing every day. Days going wrong can always be saved by poetry tea times and reading to your kids. All right, everybody. Have a fantastic day. It's a beautiful sunny one here, finally. I've been waiting for the sun to come out. It is here. I'm going to get out in it with my daughter. We have a fun errand we're going on this morning, and I will see you back here at 8 tomorrow. Goodbye, everyone. Live honestly, write bravely, and read widely.